What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of THP Strength. On today's episode, we will be interviewing Matt McInnes Watson. Matt owns a business called Plus Plyometrics, where he provides supplemental plyometrics, and he has been actually writing my plyometric progression for, I want to say, the last close to a year now, I believe. I asked him to coach me. I believe that everyone should have a coach. Even a coach should have a coach, so you take the bias out of the situation. Anyways, love Matt, love his thoughts. Talked a little bit about his plyo progression in the plyometric episode, I think the part 2. And real quick, even before we get into that, just want to say this week's podcast is brought to you by Legion Supplements. One of the biggest questions we get asked is, how can I improve recovery? One of the only ways to do this is to give your body more of what it already needs. Increasing bioavailability of these micronutrients can help you. In other words, it lets your body do what it's already trying to do during recovery, but better. I say this every time. We approach them. We believe they have the best product, and we want to pair ourselves with the best product. Everything that they have is evidence-based, research-backed in terms of what's actually in it, and they have a review board to validate that, as well as how much is in it. So if you're looking for supplements and you want to recover better, that is my number one recommendation. Foam rolling, icing, compression, all that stuff is tertiary in the way of recovery if you're not giving your body what it needs to allow it to do what it does best, which is repair itself after you go through an intense training session. All that said, thanks for coming on, Matt, and give us a little update about your life. What's going on? How is Plus Plyos going? We haven't talked in a while, other than texting.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me back on. It's obviously a new podcast, which I'm really enjoying myself listening to regularly. So doing a great job. So keep giving us amazing content online because I'm particularly enjoying it. So with me, we're now, what are we, 5 6 months into launching Plus Plyos, and we're kind of gradually building a steady um, kind of athlete base, and I'm really enjoying seeing guys get involved, and just start to learn a lot more about the plyometrics that I preach and that I teach. A lot of the stuff that you do is similar to what we program. So yeah, for me, it's always about getting people to just try it out, because a lot of guys, as soon as they start to do the plyo programs, they start to just really enjoy it, and it becomes like it's quite an addictive training method. I think people just love to jump and move. Um, Being in a gym can get boring sometimes, where you're just going up and down. But when you get sensations from jumping movements and plyometrics and speed stuff, I think it starts to get a little bit interesting. I bring a lot of variation to the table to keep you interested as well. And I do that specifically for you as well, John.
Yeah,
Just to
we'll get
keep
into
the
that.
body
There's questions
better.
about that too coming up.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know yesterday Austin did a plus plyo session, and I kind of helped coach them through it. And I did a couple of like obviously not max intensity, but like to help like demonstrate. And it was really fun just watching it and then doing some of like the less intense stuff. So
Yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
dope. Yeah.
I think
No, it's good. It's good to hear.
I think one of the biggest things I've realized over the last year, and this is more and more kind of being made clear to me, is that if you want to jump higher off one foot, plyos are such an important, maybe the most important thing that you can include in your programming. I've time and time again recently, especially, noticed improvements in my jumping over the last 8 months to a year because of the plyometric volume that I'm doing right now. And as a 1 foot jumper myself, and then someone who loves high jump and loves working with high jumpers, and then also having speed jumped, I think the plyometrics play an integral role in improving the dynamic strength of that takeoff leg in a very specific way, almost in a way that you basically can't replicate in the weight room and to a specific degree. And Thomas has always kind of hit home on that point, and we'll hopefully have him on in a later podcast. But also, you've said that as well, and I think it's very true. It's just very difficult sometimes to figure out how to integrate them in a way that allows you to do takeoffs and jumping, as well as have a integrated weight room that's also progressed too. So yeah, I've been loving them, and I think they're mega important for 1 foot jumping. So, if you guys are looking for some supplemental plyos, Plus Plyos is what I recommend. It's a great platform, web-based, and you can see all the sessions there. So not even,
So
I
just
get no kickback from this. Like,
yeah.
I know there's going to be a lot of people that immediately heard what you just said, John, and I was hoping you and Matt can kind of broach this subject real quick at the outgo of this. It's so for 2-foot jumpers, would this make sense, or is this mainly for 1-foot jumpers?
It would help both, especially the deep tier plyos, I think, would help both. I think that the 1-foot jumping, I would actually argue it's more beneficial for. I would feel comfortable saying that and confident saying that it would be a better stimulus for 1-foot jumpers, just because the ground contact times are shorter. The knee joint angles that you see in a lot of the really intense plyos, they're going to be specific for 1-foot jumping. And in 2-foot jumping, there's so many other ways to manipulate the force time, or not the length tension relationship, and then also take advantage of the force time curve. So I just think for 1-foot jumping, it tends to be a more potent and specific stimulus, I guess is maybe the better way of saying it. And because there's so much variety, you actually don't run into the issue of like training monotony. And because the volumes are appropriate, which is I think most times 2 to 3 days a week, if you're doing Matt's progressions, that you don't really run into too many issues. And he's obviously not going to throw single leg hurdle hops at you like on the ball of the foot week 1. So, obviously if you're a very elite jumper, there has to be a pretty specific plan, and Matt's done a really good job of helping me. I wouldn't say I'm a mega elite jumper, but I jump high off 1 foot. He's helped me integrate it and things like that for my 1-foot jumping, but that would be my answer for that. It's going to help both, but I think it's going to be better for 1-foot jumpers. There needs to be more of that volume consistently. I've seen that.
Yeah. I am starting to. I think I'm going on a really big learning journey when it comes to learning about 2-foot jumping and how I can manipulate what I do with my plyos to support more. I would say the more elite end of 2-foot jumpers, especially. I think that's the biggest trick for me, because I think that plyometrics can really support the lower grade of athlete, especially, and they're always going to bring in a lot of skills, a lot of just overload qualities, just building a general base of good landing management.
I think it teaches intent. It teaches intent so well.
Exactly. Someone like Isaiah has done so many 2-foot takeoffs as well. So it's kind of, when you've got kids that are almost trying to play catch up, if they're trying to learn how to dunk off 2 feet at the age of 17, 18, using a plyo stimulus is something a bit different as well. That's not necessarily going to be killing them doing loads of maximal 2-foot jumps to a hoop.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm learning, and I want to get to a stage where I can feel confident in how I would look at elite 2-foot jumpers.
Yeah.
And I'm learning a lot from you guys, especially as I kind of move through that development in my mind and what I write in research and stuff. So
yeah, and I'm sure it's probably beneficial for volleyball players too, because they tend to have they have less knee bend, and they don't jump quite as high because they don't have to. They don't have the time to do that in terms of their approaches. So I'm sure that plyos would be really beneficial for them, and understanding 2-foot jumping, you could definitely start to help that demographic, I would think.
Yeah.
So
that was actually, I had a question a few weeks ago to just message you, John, and it's good for Isaiah as well, that like, do you think that there's like a route towards having more dunkers being a lot taller and stiffer? Like, do you think that there's a plateau to having more of a softer, more knee bend kind of developed athlete? Like when I look at you, Isaiah, I'm like, where does your front squat go? Does it get to 250 kilos, or
I wish.
like what is the progression? But like, what is the progression? Like, where does that go? Is it actually we need to make like taller takeoffs in basketball? You've got a few dunkers that are like that are a bit more stiffer and use more of an elastic takeoff.
I think if your goal is to max out 2-foot jumping, then if your goal is to jump 60 inches, hypothetically, let's say we wanted Isaiah to jump 60 inches, he has to have stiffer tendons than he currently has, and he has to be stronger than he currently is. There's no question about that, because neuromuscularly, there's a lot of benefits too from just seeking out those two goals. Neuromuscularly, there's tons of benefits. And if he has stiffer tendons, he's going to be able to absorb and redistribute more energy through the takeoff in his patella and in his Achilles, but he has to be strong enough at the muscular level those tendons have to be stiff enough and strong enough and healthy enough to handle the amount of stretch that they're going to take. We have to change the properties of the tendon. And I went into this in detail during the first plyometric part 1 podcast, and Isaiah listened to it and was like, that was so much, it wasn't even related. Well, it is related, and here's why. Because it's material science. We need that material to be stiffer. And not only that, we need it to not tear. We need him to be able to push further along that curve, that stress strain curve, and change that stress strain curve such that he gets more energy for every little inch that he stretches that tendon. And further, we need it to not tear. So we need the ultimate failure point, which is the point at which it tears, or even the yield point, specifically yield point, to move forward, because past the yield point, you're moving into plasticity, and we need that tendon to stay elastic so it's not getting damaged over time. That material is not damaging over time. So we need to move that yield point over, and we also need to change Hooke's law, which is the slope, right? We need a higher slope so that for every inch that we pull it, we get more force, or every centimeter, or whatever metric of distance you want to use, we're getting more energy out of it when it returns and deforms, right? Because it's like basic physics, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if we stretch it this amount, we're going to get that much on the return. And the same thing is true of Isaiah's tendon. So that's one major thing that we need. And then further, we need to increase his max strength as much as possible so that he is able to pull on that tendon. Because if he's not strong enough and can't generate force fast enough to tug on that tendon, then it's not going to matter. We can stiffen his tendon all we want, but if he's not able to pull on it to generate that energy in the tendon, that connective tissue, we're not going to get the jumps that we want. I mean, his ground contact times are decreasing as he's jumped higher and higher. Is that correct, Isaiah?
Yeah.
So he's running faster into the jump, loading the tendon with more energy via his muscles being strong enough to hold and anchor everything in place. So his bones have to be strong enough. We don't want right now, his tendon at the proximal end is pulling away from the bone so hard. His muscle's pulling at the proximal end so hard on his quad in like the vastus lateralis that it's causing issues. He's actually causing tendon issues in the proximal portion, that's unheard of. I've never heard of that in my entire life. So we've actually gotten his tendon at the distal part so strong and so elastic and so stiff that he's having issues up the chain, where that tendon is supposed to be super freaking dense. You know what I mean? It's way stronger and bound to that bone in a very intense way. It's pretty uncommon to see the issues occur up the chain like that. I mean, I've never seen it with elite 2-foot jumpers or 1-foot jumpers really as a tendon issue in the upper quad. I've never seen that for the vastus lateralis. But that all said, to answer your question, that's if I don't care about anything other than him jumping as high as he possibly can. If I'm looking at a basketball player, that's very different, because a basketball player doesn't have the time or the benefit of a run-up that Isaiah does. Now, does increasing him to 60 inches improve everything else along the way to that? Every other strategy? Yes. He's going to be able to jump 48 inches faster and easier if he can jump 60 inches. He's going to be able to jump 30 inches faster and easier if he can jump 60 inches, because the muscle's stronger, his RFD is higher, and the tendon's stiffer. And maybe not like... The only downside would be, okay, now this force transducer, the tendon, isn't good at storing and releasing energy anymore at slow speeds, at slow velocities, because I need the muscle to produce more force. But you could circumvent that by saying, well, yeah, but now it's a stiff force transducer. So he can the muscle does all the work. Like, that's kind of what you see with these football guys that have crazy standing verticals. Their RFD is so high. They don't need to really take advantage of. It's either twofold. It's either that they have soft tendons and they can use it because they're so strong and they can get the benefit out of it in a 2-foot jump, and they're maybe slightly softer tendons and their muscles are strong. Or it's that their tendons are so stiff and their muscles are just that powerful where they don't even need to, They don't even need the tendon's energy to get the benefit out of the movement. It's both, obviously, and the strategy that you use is different depending on what you're trying to achieve. If it's a standing jump, the internal physiology is going to be very different than a running approach jump. But how you get there is somewhat similar. I mean, with Isaiah, I have to know certain things. And if I have a basketball player, I have to look at certain demands and look at the time intervals. How much time do you have to do these things? And then that gets into anticipation and reaction time. And that also gets into how much time that gives you to pre-activate a muscle. I mean, that is, in my opinion, almost more important if in like a task out of any of the tasks. And that kind of bleeds into one of the questions that I had for you, Matt, which was, and I wrote this one down, you know, the last couple weeks I started improving my 1 foot speed jumping, and not just a little bit, like I probably increased 3 inches in 3 weeks. And I haven't seen that type of improvement in really ever. The entirety of me doing speed jumping off my right leg, which I've been doing for 2.5 years. And I started to rehearse my approach because I was on this football field and it was taking me so much time to get my approach ready, and I was trying to lower into the takeoff. And if my steps were off, there was no chance I was going to be able to like do what I was trying to do. So I started counting in my head and walking around and making sure I was starting every approach on the same foot forward, and making sure that I knew when the curve was going to start, and making sure that I knew when when I needed to start lowering. So I started counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and doing that over and over and over again, just walking around. I'd be in the weight room between sets. Walking into it, left foot hits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And just pantomiming that and visualizing it and feeling the rhythm and feeling kind of the positions as I walk through it, practicing lowering the last 3 steps and going into a takeoff position with the shoulder back and my foot out in front and flicking my penultimate step foot back and just rehearsing that over and over and over again. I started to pattern it, and then I get on the field and I go to jump. First time I'm like, this isn't really right. Put my shoe out there, get the steps on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And as soon as I felt that lean, as soon as I crossed over on that right foot, on that 6th contact, so it was, you know, that right, left, right, my whole body was like it was like throwing something down a chute. It was just like, and took off. Like, did you ever see the things in the bank, like the things that take that they send up and back? It was like that. It was just like, you put it in there and it was like, well, you know, just got taken down the chute and boom, like a rocket, just took off those last 5 steps. And particularly, I mean, it just speeds up, you know, and you hear that oftentimes as a coach. I tell people that I'm like, oh, you're not accelerating through the takeoff. Your rhythm is really bad and all these different things. And I think it's just a matter of, we say this all the time, like chasing sensations. You know, I'm coming in and I'm just like, I feel that lean, I feel that pressure. And then I'm like, oh, this means it's time to go. My body is already prepared to take off 5 steps out. You know, the first 5 steps, I'm not at a point yet where my body's like, where my brain is wired like that, where step 1, I'm ready to take off. It's like I get in that curve and I feel that pressure, and that's all of the feedback to my brain to say, this is the motor pattern you're picking. So I guess that was my experience with it. That was one of the big things that I noticed helped me a ton, and I continue to do that. And I know as I get better, and Hunter alluded to this the other day, he's like, just unconscious knowing, unconscious confidence. That's kind of where I'm getting now. It's like now I'm getting to the point I don't even have to count. I just know, I feel that sensation, and internally my brain just takes off. So what do you think that do you think that's what's happening, A, that I'm anticipating better and that there's more pre-activation? And if that is the case, do you think it's maybe the most important factor in the actual takeoff and getting coordinated?
Yeah. So I think also, without you even realizing that the work that you've been doing over the past year that we've been working together, I think is now coming to fruition a little bit as well.
I definitely think that there's a big part of that. Like, obviously, my RSI has been high. You know, my RSI keeps going up. My muscular force keeps going up. But I wasn't able to, like, connect the dots. You know what I mean? If you just look at the things I was good at, like, you look at my stiffness hop go up, my RSI was a legit 3.7 or something like that, I think, or close to 4 maybe. And, you know, double leg, really strict touchdown toe off using the My Jump 2 app, 240 frames per second. You're collecting 240 data points per second, which is really intense. You know, it's a lot of data points. And, you know, you're seeing my RSI slowly climb up over time as I get that motor pattern down, as I get my RFD up, as I get slightly stiffer tendons. And, you know, coming in obviously to the year, my left foot was way better. And, you know, it was apparent, the dynamic work is working. Like, your RFD is going up. You're getting more elastic. You're getting more powerful. You're wired more, obviously. And we know plyometrics do that. There's no doubt about that. And then as I'm going into this takeoff, I was like, why am I early on? It was like, I couldn't connect the dots. I was like, I can't put 2 and 2 together. Why can I not get my right foot to be explosive and powerful? I know it is. Yesterday I put this on my video. I was like an eighth squat or whatever, quarter eighth squat, what I'd call it an eighth squat. Single leg, I can lift up. I can almost jump like from that position, that eighth squat position with a single leg with 500 pounds on my back. Like it's like not, and I think a lot of high jumpers, I think a lot of people could do that. They maybe just wouldn't try and maybe their spines would blow up. But for me, it's like, fine. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. So, I know that you put me on a force plate and you have me test my RFD and you have me test my peak forces. They're crazy high, like insanely high, very, very, very high, especially relative to my body weight. But I wasn't able to, I couldn't connect the dots. I couldn't do it. So I guess, yeah, what do you think? That all being said, I'll turn it back on you. You can, sorry to interrupt. I do that sometimes.
No, that's cool. So I think that, like you're alluding to, your ability to anticipate landings and now start to create rhythms within your body that enable you to pre-activate better. So you're activating your muscles before you're about to hit the ground, and that's we spoke about it before, and you were talking about some research and whether I'd gone into a research about it, and I have read articles where they've said that the best athletes or elite athletes and best jumpers in the world are pre-activating muscles up to 20% of the total time of a ground contact time prior to it. So let's say that you're able to put your foot down and take off in, let's say, 0.2 of a second. Then 20% of time behind that is you're almost at full activation of the muscle before you put your foot down.
So are you saying that it would be 40 milliseconds prior to touchdown?
Yeah.
I'm already
and you're almost at 100% activation. That's what some of the research studies found.
That's crazy.
There was some work from one of the Finnish researchers. Sorry if you're Finnish and I pronounce this wrong, but I think his name is Vitasalu. So he's part of the Comey crew in Carolina. And,
some of the research I looked at right before this podcast.
These guys pump out some of the best stuff when it comes to plyometrics and speed and tendon work and stuff like that. So there was findings that found that we are almost 100% activated when it comes to EMG readings and looking at surface EMG stuff. And they were looking at like lower extremities. I think they looked at quad muscles, but I'm not sure what ones. So I'm not going to try and say exactly which ones.
Yeah.
But the lower extremities were the highest activated muscles prior to that. So when I get a lot of athletes that come to me and they're like, I can't time this. I don't like to hop. Like my body just doesn't. It kind of shies away from it, or I land really toey, or it's just poorly timed. A lot of the time, the starting point is your unload phase, is your anticipation to hit the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And my preaching of plyometrics and what I coach, and the reason why I coach so many variations of movement, is to build in this network within your brain to be like, well, any kind of landing, my body is ready to go, and I'm already hitting the ground before I've hit the ground, sort of thing.
Yeah,
I have that anticipation within my body to do that. So as well as the research kind of backing that up, that's been kind of part of my coaching, part of my mentorship from when I was coached as an athlete. So I think that has been a big learning part for yourself, especially with your right leg takeoff, because you've been a power or strength jumper for all of your life off of your other leg. And I think the pre-activation methods are slightly different, and I think that they're slightly different for 2-foot jumps and everything.
Yeah.
Like someone like Isaiah would feel it differently with things like how he gathers his arms and the pre-activation that he might get in shoulder girdle, things like that, and how that links to the contralateral hip.
Mm-hmm.
So there's slightly different pre-activation methods. So it was about remapping that for you. And you're not a right foot takeoff guy as well.
I am now.
There's been so many things, and I always, when I try to explain kind of neuromuscular patterns and skills. I kind of do a drawing on a piece of paper, and I say the best athletes in the world have like a really dark scribble where they've done millions of the same landings and they've been perfect takeoffs every time. Someone that is really a beginner to this sort of new form of takeoff or changing your takeoff leg, you have all these weird directions of scribbles that have this neural mapping is just not well lined up. You know, it's exactly the same way that you described, I think, a couple of weeks ago with looking at the good muscular fibers and how they all sting together, sort of thing. I think that's the same with strong neural connections.
Yeah,
so,
no, I think it's exactly the same thing. Is like looking at the EMG is going to tell you that, right? You can see, hey, look, there's a ton of activation in the soleus or the gastroc or the vastus lateralis before your leg ever touches the ground, before that agonist is ever recruited. Like it's not even producing active force in the other direction or anything else, but we can see that the muscle is already pulling on the tendon, right? And you'll see in the research that you were just with that research group you were just talking about, they're talking about tendon lengthening prior to touchdown and preactivation and tendon lengthening and preactivation and tendon lengthening. And it's kind of weird because you hear that and you're like, well, how is the tendon lengthening prior to touchdown? Like that doesn't make any sense. You're not angulating in that direction whatsoever. The muscle should be lengthening because it's an eccentric contraction. And, you know, it kind of flips the switch on everything you learn in school, because in school you learn, oh, well, the down phase is eccentric. The agonist is on the whole time. The down phase of that agonist is eccentric. So it's lengthening on the way down and it's isometric at the bottom. And then it contracts concentrically on the way up. But then you learn in sprinting and jumping that when you move really fast or you're doing a takeoff or a landing, that actually on the way down, your muscle's pulling up, your muscle's shortening actually. And because it's anchored to a tendon, if the tendon's down here and it's anchored down here, that it's stretching that tendon out as the muscle shortens, as you're touching the ground, as you're coming down. You're like, that makes no sense. Like, how is the tendon lengthening prior to touchdown? Why is the muscle functioning concentrically? Like, none of this makes any sense to me. And it flips the switch on like everything you kind of know, but that's why I think preactivation is so freaking important. Like being able to know what's going to happen before it happens.
Here's a question, John. If we were to look at it, if we were to kind of look at the bits we've just been going over and saying that we're building new patterns of neural maps and all this sort of stuff. Like I wonder if a beginner or someone that's trying something different off their other leg, I wonder if the pull on the tendon is as good or as great, and we are actually getting more of a typical eccentric lengthening.
Oh yeah, I'm positive that would happen.
More
yeah, I think what you just described, this crap. I think it's crappy if you have an eccentric contraction. I think that means you suck. Like everyone's like, oh, you got to focus on eccentric muscle contractions. They're so important from a neural perspective. Yeah. But like in terms of motor patterning and producing a lot of force in a bouncy activity, hell no. If you have a landing and takeoff versus a bounce, you suck. I think that's just like, you have to deflect off the ground. If you're not deflecting off the ground, that means that you're doing an eccentric muscle contraction. And that's slow. It's slow to go from eccentric to isometric to concentric versus concentric. That's it. Like you're unfolding the leg, boom, concentric. Stretch out that Achilles tendon, load it up so it's a freaking rocket when you go to push off the ground. And I think, like you said, doing that was a big question I had actually, was why do I do so much variety of all these different takeoffs? I'll go laterally, I'll go side to side, I'll do medium, submaximal to more. And it really, I think simply is that you are getting better at landing and taking off. And you're getting better at anticipating the ground. And the better you are at anticipating the ground, the more preactivation you have. And if you can do that in a bunch of different settings, then it becomes subconscious and it becomes automatic. And then when you go to jump off your right leg, you'll hear people say, it just happened. I just had the best day of my life in high jump. I don't even know how. It just happened. I just had the best jump session of my life. It just happened. I don't know. I didn't even think. Yeah, no shit, you didn't think. Your brain just, it's been thinking for the last 1,000 to 2,000 to 10,000 reps that you got of that activity. That's why repetition is so important in anything you do, just to pattern it and learn and, repeat. So 100%. I definitely think that crap jumpers, me early on, no matter how good your RFD is, no matter how good you are at certain plyos or whatever else, or the 10 plyos you maybe did your whole life, you might not just automatically wire a super explosive right leg, it just might not happen because you don't have that skill. You haven't developed that broad general ability to anticipate and fire that muscle.
Yeah, this is my big point when people come to me and say, oh, but some of these movements aren't plyometric, or they like to see that. We were talking about the post I just put on Instagram of this guy jumping off a 210-meter box. Like, why isn't it all depth jumps? Or like, what's the point in it not all being shock based, where everything is about getting the greatest loads and getting our body used to high loading and stuff like that. And I think that it's because the plyometrics that I preach, or whether you want to call them leg dynamics or just locomotion in general, if you teach extremely kind of violent movements, like some of the ones I do, or all the way down to something that's very light or something that's a little bit softer, it brings so many more skills with it. It brings so many more neural patterns that, like you say just then, it gives you the ability to be like, well, you know what, I don't have to think anymore. I'm so well mapped. I'm so much more safer when it comes to landing. I don't have to worry about ACL issues, or I don't have to, when I'm cutting in a game, it's not going to be something that my brain even has to think about, or, and you're able to do things at a much more competitive rate rather than it being, there's a conscious level to it, and we want to make subconscious athletes that are able to just go out and perform.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the biggest. I think the biggest annoyance that I always get is people ask me, well, why haven't you got enough depth jumps in your program? It's like, well, there's more to this. There's levels to it.
There's levels to this shit.
Exactly.
No, I definitely agree. That was one of the biggest frustrations I had, was being patient as a right foot speed jumper. I'm like, well, how can I just do this as fast? Why can't I just fucking go out and jump 2 meters right away? I was frustrated. Well, yeah, because my brain it's not like that right now. My muscles don't pre-activate when they need to. And I don't have any level of anticipation because I've never done this thing you're asking me to do. So I have to rep it out. I have to get globally better at knowing my foot's about to hit the ground. I'm not thinking about this. It's just happening. It does it. One of the biggest scenarios I noticed this, or best illustrates this, examples, was doing the hops on the right foot. It was so bad. The left foot, it took me 2 sessions, and I was just like, got it. Left, 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 left. Yeah. So easy. If you put me on the force plates, though, my left foot actually doesn't produce as much force. My peak force is actually lower. My RFD is about the same, but I go to the right foot and can't do it. Flat every time, slow. I can't turn on the muscle. It's just not happening. The faster I go, the flatter and the more my foot just freaking caves, the more shin splints I have. Like, shin splints are a great example. When I first started speed jumping on my right foot lower leg would just explode. It felt like everything just shut off, and all of a sudden the ground was there, and my muscles were like, shit, and all the pressure built up. I've never had shin splints in my whole life. It's like, why does that happen? Well, because your muscles are not turning on prior to you touching down, and that just takes a lot of reps, and it takes reps over weeks and months, and yeah, it's just really, really a lot of time. So as you get that volume in, as you get those reps in, and I think there's ways you can help yourself along the way, specifically with high jump. And I'm still learning that. But, eventually I don't have any lower leg pain anymore because I'm getting better at recruiting those muscles earlier and earlier and earlier. And that means that my lower leg is stable when I touch down. There's no mushing out. The pre-activation is really high. So before I ever strike the ground, my leg's already this stable, elastic surface, not this mushy, soft, compressible spring that is just going to mush out as soon as I touch the ground and then push up again, which early on, that's what I did. The stiffness has come a long way in the last, 2 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably.
that was I wrote down a few notes before, and we kind of discussed some of the questions that we talk about, and I was like, well, what does anticipation bring? And I was like, I put down 4 points. Well, straight away, it gives you a faster stiffening effect. Like you're able to. People ask me, how do I stiffen my joints, or how do I get a stiffer takeoff? Well, point one is, well, if you pre-anticipate the ground, then you're going to be able to stiffen that joint at a faster rate because it's already contracted.
It's already stiff before you hit the ground.
It's already stiff, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
and you can't do it actively.
So
That's the other thing. People think you do it actively. It's not an active thing. You can't pull your toes up and have it happen. Like, I hate that. People are like, oh, just dorsiflex. Oh, just flex the muscles. Like, it doesn't really work like that. Like, sometimes I'll tell people hit the ground before it hits you. And double leg plyos, that's easy. You know, bounding or alternate leg bounding, that's easy. You get into hopping, you get into takeoffs, like single leg takeoffs. It's not cyclic. It's acyclic.
No.
Jumping is acyclic. Every stride is different. It is an entire different motor sequence from the first step to the takeoff, where hopping is cyclic. You know, bounding is pretty much cyclic. Leaps are cyclic. And as you start getting into these things, these complex plyos, where it's like, okay, I want one high hop, one low hop, a stride, then a high stride, and then low hop, high hop, stride, takeoff, land on 2 feet, takeoff. Like, you start adding in that level of complexity, how in the fuck are you supposed to anticipate the ground whatsoever? Like, you can't. You know what I mean? It's like near impossible. And then you're like, okay, now I want you to run as fast as you can, go one high, one flat, one high, one flat. And then I want you to jump over this and zigzag with your right foot and then do a backflip and land on your right foot and then go ahead and into a single leg sprint hop. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. You know, you can't possibly pre-contract or think or do anything, you know, like that. It is all so variable and it has to be subconscious, but that's the beauty of the variation that you kind of build in. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. So and a lot of people will say that, where they're like, well, just hit the ground harder, and it gets to a stage where you get to more of a stamping effect, and you're trying to concentrically move, like you're trying to activate muscles concentrically, I would say, it's like a push. I'm trying to push the ground all the time. Well, we've actually got to accept the ground before we can push off of it.
I think what happens is there's no anticipation. Actually, what happens is you're just like, if you strike the ground, you're turning on the wrong agonist to do that, right? So let's say you're trying to do a single leg takeoff, right? And you're like stomping through the ground. Your hip is contracting concentrically, causing the whole lever to move downwards. And then I think like your knee ends up being in a bunch of flexion, and you don't actually get that pre-contraction happening with the leg fully extended, the lever being in a really strong position, you having a lot of axial loading through the long axis of the body. You don't have that happen. If you stomp the ground immediately, like, that's not going to happen. And if you try to put the leg straight and you try to whip the foot down, now your hamstring is contracting and your hip is contracting and your knee is shut off. So it's not going to pre-anticipate the takeoff. Like, it is like this passive unfolding where you just delicately float it out and then you let your leg react to the ground. Like, that was something I had to learn, was there's nothing consciously that you're going to change by trying to stomp or strike or pull or push. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's too slow. Early on, yes. You know what I mean? When I had to learn these basic motor patterns, yes. But then once I acquired those, it was like, okay, trying to do this anymore is pointless. Like, I would have been better off just trying to relax and focus on the free leg and letting my foot react to the ground, which is eventually what I started to do, and then it became passive. Yeah, anyways, I agree with that. I didn't understand what you meant prior, like a year ago, and now I really get it. Like, now I'm like, oh, that's what he meant by that.
Full circle. So yeah, the 4 points were faster stiffening effect, which then subsequently produces or gives you the ability to potentially take on a higher eccentric force. So your ability to accept load in the eccentric phase is going to be a lot higher, because straight away you have a greater stiffening effect.
Yeah, during yielding.
Then in turn gives you a faster ground contact time, because you're not sat in an isometric phase for so long, because you're still trying to stiffen when you've hit the ground.
Yeah.
Which in turn gives you a greater use of energy transfer, basically. So you've got fast stiffening, ability to take higher load, faster ground contact time, and a greater transfer of energy.
Yeah.
Which is like those 4 points. I'm like, well, shit, I want all of those. Like what does it take for me to get that? And coming full circle, what we said is that variety of movement is so important. And doing one thing the same all the time is not going to be the way to create pre-anticipatory methods as you wish them to be.
I think like,
especially at the level.
Yeah, I think you said this, but like coaching fluidity and coaching like just general where you should land on your foot, you're probably going to get 90% of what you want out of that plyo. Like, just coaching like, hey, I want you to stay relaxed, stay fluid, push, relax, push, relax, push, relax. Like that's, or push, relax, or whatever it is, and teaching the basic fundamentals of that movement. And then once people start to get, okay, this is the basic movement literacy I need. This is the basic movement literacy I need to have to do this. Okay, well now how do I coordinate this to get a fluid subconscious pushing in and out of these positions? And it's like you shut your brain off, you relax, and you just land, push, land, push, land, push. And like over time you start to just develop that knowing, and you get better at it. And I think like decreasing effort levels can actually really help with that. You have oftentimes put in my progressions like submaximal, and I value that really highly, those plyos, because one, they warm me up a lot. They get my tendons really compliant, which is great. Two, they teach me to just relax and let my body react, versus when you try too hard, you lose that anticipation and you lose that pre-tension or pre-activation, because you can't. How are you supposed to subconsciously pre-activate a muscle if you're thinking about what you're going to do next? It's just not going to happen. You have to shut your brain off,
Too fast. It's click of the finger stuff.
Yeah. I think there are certain cues, like one word cues sometimes, that you can keep in your head as a reminder to do certain things. But if you ask Isaiah, on your highest jumps, what are you thinking about?
Push hard off my penultimate, run fast. That's basically it.
Yeah, it's not like, hey, can you pre-contract your hamstring for me? Once you're off that penultimate step, it's done.
The rest takes care of
and
itself.
I've asked you guys that so many times. I'm like, well, what do you think about? And you're like, nothing. I'm like, what's it feel like? Boing. It feels like a rocket ship.
Isaiah, John posted the video of you doing that insanely high East Bay, and I think sometimes I wonder if some of your best jumps, like in terms of, let's say, like forced output, come from something like an East Bay where you're actually thinking about something completely different. Like you're thinking about what the ball's going to do, or your position in the air, or something like that. Do you have like a central focus for like every single dunk, or is it something that you've done so many times you just roll up and think, I'm just going to push off my right penultimate and that's it?
I'm going to kill this dunk. That's what he thinks.
Yeah. Specifically, that East Bay I remember super vividly, because that day, that's probably my highest jumping day ever. And it was more of a fun day. I went to the gym to play basketball. I wasn't thinking about like any dunks or anything like that. And it was very like a lighthearted mood, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Like when I went for that East Bay, it was just like, I'm gonna throw this ball up as high as I can and just try to catch that shit high as fucking punch it. Like that's that's all I thought about. Like I didn't think of like, all right, I'm gonna center this ball like 5 feet to the right of my center of mass, and then I'm gonna lob it I'm gonna lob this shit as high as I can and dunk it as hard as I can. And I've done this dunk so many times I don't have to think about it. Like,
yeah.
So, and that's how almost every jump, even my Vertec test. I don't know if you're John. I think I touched so my previous highest touch ever was 12 feet, and like after that I was stuck at 11 and a half. I think that day I touched 11 like not trying. Like I literally just went up and like didn't think about anything, just super easy and touched it. So my best jumps ever are definitely like it just happens. I've lost. It's what Hunter said, where you unconsciously do it well. I guess I forgot
Hunter, how did you word
the
it?
saying went.
It's unconsciously competent.
Competent, not confident.
Unconsciously competent. Yeah. So that describes it perfectly. I'm not really thinking about it super well. The times where I do think about it is more the sessions where it's bad, and then I start getting in my head because I'm like, let's say I'm having a bad jumping day and I'm like getting rim stuffed on 360 East Bay, and then that's when I'm thinking, okay, push hard off my penultimate, drive the ball up, like that's when I really have to think about it. But
I've been there, man. I've been there in high jump days, and I'm thinking about like how to run and stuff like that. And you're like, just leave the facility. Like you're done.
yeah.
You're not jumping high today, Matt.
That's when you know it's bad. That's when you know it's bad when
You're
like
gonna try.
When you feel sluggish on your run. Like I feel like I can't walk properly. Like that's when you know it's bad.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. I really do. I think it comes back to this anticipation response. And there are so many questions here, Matt. There are literally so many questions. And I'm going to ask Hunter. Hunter, what timestamp are we at right now?
I have a couple of questions, by the way.
Yeah, Hunter, what timestamp are we at?
We are right at an hour.
What?
Or 50 minutes. My bad.
Oh, holy
50 minutes.
God. All right. Well, we're going to have to do another one, Matt. So we'll have to schedule you to come back and keep these questions up. But Isaiah, pick one question.
Oh, God.
Pick one question, you slob.
I'm gonna ask two easy ones,
and then a hard one.
I'll do the hard one. So where would you land on your foot on a plyo versus a max approach 1 foot jump, and is there a difference? Let's say for a dunk, just a straight up.
Yeah, straight up dunk, and then I think let's say we're using like a bound or something like that. I think the difference is quite different, especially like if you were to use a dunk. I mean, a dunk is slightly different to a high jump takeoff, but it's relatively similar, let's say. So with more like locomotive plyometrics, there tends to be a lot more horizontal effort to it and propelling your body a lot more flatter. So you will tend to get more of a rolling contact. I always preach like a full foot landing and then to just roll straight off your toe. Some people will use like a heel to toe movement well. I don't like to teach it too much because I think it teaches a little bit of braking forces. So I like to try and get like my heel needs to be underneath my butt if it's going to touch the ground. Like it needs to be directly underneath my hip. Now because the transfer of energy when you're taking off of one leg and you're trying to go directly vertical, it's going to be different because you have your foot out in front of you.
So it's like hard to avoid your heel when you're trying to.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid your heel, especially when you're taking off of one leg in comparison to doing let's say one leg plyos. But again, I still don't like to teach the heel to go down first because it again preaches a form of braking force rather than a transfer of force.
Yeah, so it should just happen naturally. You shouldn't be actively trying to land on your heel. It's more like you're trying to get more of a midfoot contact, but because of the nature of the jump, it just naturally will hit.
Yeah, I think the best jumpers in the world if you look at them, they tend to land really like it times so perfectly. Like if you look at really good 1 foot, especially high jumpers, and you'll see a much more of a novice jumper that might roll off of his heel. What I've
noticed. And what I've noticed with like the more novice jumpers is like, and I think this is where the shin problems come in and the stomping, and this actually leads into my second question, but it's like, it's almost like their foot, it's like a 2-point contact. It's like heel and then like a slap. Like it's like dun, dun, instead of like a smooth like roll. So that leads into my second question. This one's easier. You mentioned earlier that it should be more about accepting the ground and then pushing off. Are there any cues that you have and you give to people to avoid stomping?
Well, going kind of back to what John was mentioning with using sub-maximal work, I think that I take away cues a lot to just say, you just need to get this volume of work in. You need to do a lot of light, bouncy work where your body is figuring stuff out on its own, and you're able to sensationally feel landings a lot more.
And then you just turn up the intensity.
Yeah, you just turn up the intensity and develop your own ability to create intent when it comes to more intense plyometrics. So unfortunately, I know that's not for listeners. That's not necessarily always what they want to hear. Like that there isn't necessarily going to be a cue, but I think that's the reality of it.
The reality is you got to do a shit ton of jumps
Yeah,
with good technique.
it's the exact same thing. Is people that stomp tend to not anticipate the ground well. They don't have the ability to do that. So people that stomp often get shin splints, probably because number one, they land heel first, and then they get that slapping recall of the whole of the rest of their foot, which probably means that the lower extremities and all up the chain behind your calf, in the front of your shin, all of those muscles they're going from 0 to 100 in the snap of a finger, and you're like, oh damn, okay, I can't use my heel bone to break the whole of this force of this run up.
Yeah.
Then
It's like when you're driving a manual car and you like just let off the clutch and like the car like does that like shake thing.
Exactly.
That's what it reminds me of.
You're not ready for it, are you? The car isn't ready for it. It just goes whoop whoop and jolts.
Yeah.
So
That's a really good analogy. Wow. Well done, Isaiah.
Yeah. It's not exactly. So you need to build in that anticipation to be able to do that. So people that come to me with shin splints, I can almost tell that they either land really poorly, or when they want to land in a full foot, more of a safe way or more effective way, it's because they can't pre-anticipate well. So you can do all the shin exercises in the world, but it don't mean shit. It's not going to get the job done when it comes to putting your foot in the ground and receiving 5 or 6 times your own body mass in point.
Because there's nothing that you can really do to prepare yourself for the forces you're gonna face when you're stomping through.
I mean, that's I always will say this, like, it is all about anticipating and pre-activation. You can do all the strength work you want. You can get that single leg squat up to 600 pounds. Go for it. I can get your 8 squat up to 500 plus. But if you can't do the takeoff and you can't turn those muscles on at the right time beforehand, you're never going to be able to use it. You just can't. You're just not going to. And that's my 2 cents.
You're shooting a cannon out of a canoe right there.
I like that analogy a lot as well. Wow, guys. Whoa, guys. Chill out with the analogies. I think we're approaching over an hour here, and we got to cut off at some point. Matt, we're definitely going to have you back on. We always say this, and we are true to our word, just in a timely fashion. Can't make that guarantee. No.
We're getting way better, though.
We are getting way better. We're definitely getting way better with making sure that we are doing them every day and realizing the value that our members and people that listen to them and coaches get out of them. So we're trying to stay as consistent as possible. We have a couple other guests lined up, one of which was you. We have Thomas coming on, which I'm super excited about. And Hunter, you said there was one more. Do you remember who it was, Hunter, off the top of your head?
Chris Bearcat.
Who was it?
Chris Bearcat.
I've got to familiarize myself with all these guests. But yeah, Matt, thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. I will do the closing remarks now. If you guys are listening, make sure that you like, comment, subscribe. I always say this, but I am super diligent about getting back to any questions in the comments section. I believe Matt has YouTube, so he can answer your questions there as well. And if you're listening to it on the streaming service of Spotify or Apple, make sure that you give us 5 stars, like it, comment. It helps the algorithm. It helps us get pushed out to as many viewers as possible. And then lastly, if you are listening to it, feel free to screenshot it, post it on your story, and tag us. We will reshare it or add it so that we can push this content out to as many people as possible. Thanks for listening, guys, and we will catch you on the next episode. Peace out.